Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Nocturama. This film was written and directed by Bertrand Bonillo. I'm just going to cut through all the bullshit and just say that I love this film. I love it so much. I think it's one of the most remarkable films of the year, if not the most remarkable. This movie is about a group of young people. A lot of them are, college age. Some of them are even younger. And they come from all different kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of different ethnicities, and they are all working together to commit multiple acts of terrorism all at once in Paris. This film is separated into two halves. The first half of the film, maybe a little less than a half of the film, focuses on carrying out the actual act, the terrorist act, in a very brilliantly focused, very tense, very methodical, eerily quiet sequence. And the second half is after the bomb goes off. That is where Paris is in a state of chaos, and the terrorists all end up hiding out in this windowless shopping mall, shopping center, whatever, that is closed all night. They stay there throughout the night. And actually, fun fact, that is the same shopping mall that Leos Carax shot Holy Motors in, another one of a film that I admire, one of my favorite films of the decade so far, actually. And that is all you need to know about this film. No more, no less. It's a film that is It's different from what you're used to, I'm pretty certain, because it's not concerned with all of the typical things that you normally find in a compelling story. This is not concerned with the plot. There is really no moral compass here, and there's not much character development at all. I know that I constantly use the word skeletal. It seems like I've been using that word a lot lately in a lot of reviews because that's a constant criticism I have, but I think that with this film, it turns the term skeletal into a positive for me. And that is one of the main criticisms of the film, is that it is so skeletal. And a lot of people have this sort of idea that, well, we don't know much about these terrorists. We don't know why they do what they do. We don't know where they come from. There's very, very little information. Also, the film, there's not much to give you in terms of logistics. You can't look at this film from a rational point of view. Bonello likes to do all kinds of different interesting twists and turns with the kind of the choreography of the film. He likes to mess with time. Sometimes he will play a scenario and he'll play it over and over and over again from multiple points of view. There are other moments that are kind of surreal. They have sort of a dream-like logic to them. You're not sure whether or not it's a dream or not. And a lot of the decisions that these characters make are just really bad decisions. There is, as I said, no rationality at all. And a lot of what you see, because they are young kids, so that's part of it, but they just make very, very, very dumb decisions. And that could easily take you out of the film. But to all of the critics out there, I say that if you focus on what I just said, all the things that I just listed, I think you're missing the point entirely of what the film is trying to do. The minute that you start to get bogged down with the minutia of the events and the motivations and all of that is the moment that you misunderstand what the film is going for. This is a movie that is more about abstractions. It's about capturing the essence of a society and representing it in a very, as I said, dreamlike, very artful sort of way. You can tell that Bonello is very heavily influenced by a lot of films and directors before him, but I would say that Stanley Kubrick is maybe the main influence, in the sense that both of them have a tendency to be less interested in the plot and in the characters being well-defined. Instead, they like to approach everything very distantly. It's very cold. Like in the beginning of the film, the camera is constantly following the terrorists. As they go from place to place. And it reminds you a lot of what Kubrick does, because he does the same thing. He loves to follow characters down hallways and things like that. Both writers/directors are very much the distant observer. They're interested in examining life forms as if they're taking part in some sort of social experiment. So it's like the terrorists, in a way, are almost like little lab rats that are in a maze that we can examine very curiously. And there are quite a few shots in the film that remind me so much of The Shining. It's very similar when you think about it, because in The Shining, those characters are in a hotel and they're stuck there, and obviously the paranoia and the tension builds and builds until the Jack Torrance character snaps psychologically. And this film is the same, because you have characters that are all confined in one space, and they have to sit there and live there and worry about what's going on outside and who might have known, who might have made the mistakes carrying out the act. And both of those films you could definitely see as metaphors for human behavior and the filter of social constraints. And in this case, in the film Nocturama's case, it's that metaphor is consumerism. When the film opens, we see all of these different characters in what seems like very mundane situations. Characters getting ready in front of the mirror, sitting on a subway. And you don't realize that all of these characters that you're seeing, they're not just extras, they're actually the terrorists themselves. And that's the power of it. You don't realize that one character may be sitting across from another one, and you don't know that they're actually about to interact quite a bit throughout the film. And there's an eerie ambiguity where the characters aren't even really introduced at all, in the typical sense, I should say. They feel like strangers. They feel like just average people, like it could be any of us. And even on the subway, the idea of a subway is very interesting because it's underground, and it has a strange feeling of people just kind of passing each other, going from one to the other, and not really having any substantial moments, just kind of cutting through all these different paths. I think that if Bonello were a less sophisticated writer or less sophisticated director, that you could see this film, especially the second half of the film, as kind of like an overtly conscious attempt at making fun of the millennial generation and their obsession with destroying the old world, the old ways of handling things in civilization. Yet there's that hypocrisy because they're also drawn to the material world. But I think because the film doesn't really have that much of a moral center and it doesn't take the time to really get to know these characters at all, that way it doesn't really fall victim to the whole cautionary tale thing. And it's quite possible that these are just a bunch of people that really don't have a very compelling reason for why they do what they do. And I mean, it's possible, but maybe that's the key, that all of these opinions and these attempts to change the course of the world are utterly meaningless. It's a weird paradox because these characters, as I said in the beginning of the review, they make a lot of really dumb decisions, but I think that's also partially kind of something that Bonello is observing about the millennial generation, that these characters, they both want to hide from their inevitable fate, and yet they also have kind of that death wish. It's like they want to be seen. They want to have their moment of glory where they have power. And we all kind of have that. We want to draw attention to ourselves. And that's the big contradiction of humanity, being repelled by what we ultimately want and vice versa. And I really like the second half of the film, even more than the first, as great as the first half is, because that's where everything gets more grounded. And I really think it does some very trippy things, because all of these little lab rats are stuck together, and you see a lot of really cool visual metaphors. And there's one image where one of the terrorists is just walking, and all of a sudden he sees a mannequin who is wearing the exact same outfit, and they just kind of stare at each other, and it's a long shot. Great image, very haunting. There are also a lot of reflections in the movie, a lot of mirrors that you see. And I also think that's very interesting because in a way that kind of represents the transparency that in this society in particular, we've grown accustomed to feeling that increasing paranoia, like we're being watched, like we never really are in control of ourselves. But I also think that the mirrors could, in a way, represent filmmaking itself. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's just kind of one interpretation I see. And I think that Bonello wants us to be conscious of the filmmaking techniques that he's employing. It's a very clinical way of showing us that cinema is a tool to explore behavior. He takes the whole building of the tension to a very literal level, in the sense that you think of Hitchcock, that famous quote he said about, a whole movie is waiting for a bomb to go off. And of course the bomb is a metaphor. It could be anything that's raising stakes in a story. But in this film, there's literally a bomb and you're just waiting for it to go off. And all of the characters in the second half are in a sort of set, you could say, in the mall. They can do all kinds of things. They can really play house. They can play music, they can dance, they can sleep in the beds, they can look at the wedding dresses on display. But for me, the big haunting key to the film are the mirrors and how they relate to film, because film is often a reflection of ourselves. When we go see a movie, we are seeing versions of ourselves up on the screen, but it's obviously through the eyes of a different character or whatever. And there's a key moment that I have to mention because I think it's really, really spectacular, and spoiler alert, but towards the end of the film, one of the characters realizes that they're gonna get caught and that it's pretty much over. And at that point, there's a transition before it gets to the next sequence where the camera starts at the very top of a staircase, and at the very bottom, there's a mirror, and it kind of just goes down, it zooms down slowly. And that's just an incredible, very haunting image that is so introspective for us as viewers, because it's as if to say we fall into our reflections through art. And through art, we are able to accept ourselves, accept our ways, we accept our mortality and all that. And it reminds me of the moment at the very end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where Dave is pointing his finger and you see the monolith and the camera zooms into the monolith. And a lot of people do see that as that monolith and that moment as a metaphor for a film screen as well. And even better though, after that scene with the mirror and the staircase, that transitions into a scene where one of the terrorists is lip-syncing a rendition of Shirley Bassey's My Way, and he's wearing a wig and all this makeup, and he's performing for the other terrorists. And it's kind of funny, but it has a kind of David Lynch quality, that sort of performance art that he loves so much. The idea of performance, putting on a face for the world, like the masks, because you do see masks in other parts of the film as well. And it's so typical of human nature, right? It's like, even if I'm gonna die after this night, I did it my way. I'm singing, I'm performing. But there's that bitterness too, that bittersweetness, because it's like all of these characters are realizing in that moment that they've pretty much accepted their fate. And they've accepted that all of this is part of the pageantry. All the actions of humans is something we put on, and we are very seduced by it. And even in that, though, there's something genuinely touching. It's a person trying to make sense of things and themselves despite the masks that they wear for the world. So yes, this film is very different. It's very tense, and it's masterfully choreographed. That has to be pointed out. I want to watch this movie yet again and be able to diagram it, because it's just so intricate the way they do things. And just in terms of the delivery and the approach of the subject matter, it uses techniques that obviously Bonello's predecessors have used in the past, but in such a refreshing way. I haven't seen a movie this unique in a long time, and I've seen it twice, and I just love it, and I want to keep watching it more and more. And that's my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to check out any of my social media information, it is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe, but only if you want to. Catch you next time.